Welcome to The Straight Hook. I am your host, Ian Duncan, Li Xinghui, and today I am honored to have with me LoAn Guylaine Tran, Cheng Feng. LoAn is a Daoist priestess and teacher trained in residence at the Five Immortals Temple on WuDang Mountain for many years. Her knowledge and practice is deep and broad, including the full spectrum of Daoist healing and internal traditions. She's at home in the rituals of morning and evening liturgy, in herbs and acupuncture, in divination, feng shui, talisman, and in the health and martial systems of gong and gong fu. She grew up in France and teaches in French and English in Europe and North America, and occasionally at her home temple in China. LoAn joins us today from Vietnam. Welcome, LoAn.
Thank you, Ian. Thank you for this invitation and for this very positive introduction of my small person.
No, it's wonderful to have you and to have this opportunity. So I'd love to hear a little bit about the life that led into this immersive life of practice and commitment. So growing up in France, did you have a clear leaning toward spiritual things and spiritual practice that you recognized in yourself early on?
Yeah, so I think there are many conditions that came together that led me down that path. But yeah, clearly, yes, of course. I remember as a young child having a very clearly spiritual inclination. But to me, it also is a part of childhood innocence and its ability to communicate with the invisible, with what's not manifested, its ability to sense before words and ideas and concepts. So yeah, so I think that spiritual relating to the world, to the self, was always pretty much there indeed. And then, yeah, many conditions definitely led down that path. I think definitely as a person, just, everyone is different and everyone has different characteristics and personality traits. As a person, I need to make sense of life, of my life, of the world. And as a child, the more I grew up, the less the world made sense, if you will, as it runs, like in its actual form and shape and political structure, economical structure, societal structure, all of it. The more I understood of it, the more I understood the world I was to grow up in, live in, partake in, the least it made sense. So it was hard at first to even envision that I could be part of this world and of society at large somewhere. So that was a big question mark. A question mark of what is the meaning of life? What is this world? What is it the way it is? And what are we supposed to do there if so many things seem to be upside down in terms of values and principles?
Yeah.
So there was that. And then for sure, also there was my background because I am half French and half Chinese Vietnamese. So there was also, in my childhood, I was exposed to many elements of Chinese Vietnamese religion, of Sanjiao religion, if you will, Buddhism, Daoism, Confucianism, but with no explanations, with no language, with no structure around it. It was just a lot of direct impressions from the environment, my grandmother, and in the community. But also, and here it's also related to the history of the Vietnamese refugee community in France that comes from the decolonial war, the first Vietnam War, actually, that the Vietnamese people call the French War, which happened before the Vietnamese War. And if we look at this whole piece of history in the history of the Vietnamese people, under colonialism, for a lot of people who ended up leaving Vietnam as refugees, they were submitted to a very intense process of acculturation, So of uprooting their cultural background within integrating into the French population. So erasure of language, erasure of names, erasure of a lot of cultural elements, generally from childhood, if possible. That's what happened to my father. So as a second generation, for me, it was witnessing many things that were never explained to me. So absorbing them and also feeling like the very deep chasms that acculturation brings in people, that uprootment brings in people. And so if you put all these aspects together, it did sooner or later lead me down the path I was to walk, basically.
So it sounds like, the socio-political aspect of that kind of coming to understand as you grew up, as I imagine, that gap and that journey made you question things in a particular way. But that aspect is not necessarily intertwined with the spiritual questioning and the spiritual.
No, it's not. And I didn't start with the spiritual practice and the spiritual questioning. I started as an activist. So as someone who was very much turned outward and who was very active in the external world at first, manipulating a lot of ideas and being very active, having a lot of activities, creating a lot of structures, getting involved in organizations. Professionally, I first became a project coordinator for NGOs, for solidarity projects, international solidarity projects. And I actually first specialized in human trafficking, and especially human trafficking for the sex work industry. So I worked with women and with children, mostly girls, in the sex work industry. I worked for peace as well. I worked in Palestine. I was an activist in Palestine in 2003. So there's like a whole decade of my life that's very intensely involved in the world and in some of the harshest places of the world, if you will, with the need to go there and to face things as they were there, suffering as it is there, and question what can you do, what can be done, and how to do it. And it was great. It was sometimes, I really have a lot of memories of this part of my life, and I really liked the direct contact with people and with these realities, and the feeling of doing everything you can to make a change and to contribute something that can change a life, basically. But maybe because I was young, or maybe that's just the way I function somewhat, it led me to like repetitive burnouts. And also, if you work in very intense environment, there's very little you can do. At the end of the day, however much you do, the ocean of suffering is so wide that you end up always feeling very, very small, very, very tiny, very, very tired. And so you keep questioning, where is the beginning of things? Where is the root of change? Yes. And actually my turn inward and my turn towards spirituality happened in Palestine at the contact of the Palestinian people. I was there as a women rights activist in 2002, 2003. And I met so many incredible people who lived with so little freedom, so little rights, so little space, so little resources, but so much dignity, so much generosity, and so much education. I was very impressed. The Palestinian people is the most educated population of the entire Arabic world. Nobody knows that, but and if you see the condition in which they study, it's just very, very impressive. And so amongst this population, I've met so many incredible people that were serving their communities, that kept every day resourcing themselves with an inner light that they could share with others, that I really had to look at that. How do they do that?
Yeah.
How do they manage to get up in the morning and find a way to generate hope?
Yeah. Where does that strength?
That translates into energy that they can bring in their community in an environment that's defined by despair and anger.
Mm-hmm.
And in all those people, the common trait I observed was faith, pure faith.
Yeah.
From the heart.
Yeah.
Really, it was a turning point for me because I was so involved externally trying to make a change, but that really struck me. And that's how I started turning inward and
Mm-hmm.
going inward. I also remember once actually sitting, meditating before I was told meditation, at least, still in Palestine in the Gaza Strip under an apricot tree, and pondering, contemplating all these questions. And then I had suddenly a very strong feeling from within, like an intuitive insight, if you will, that there must be on this planet some people who are not doing much in terms of external action, but who have been able to clarify their own mind, heart, energy field so much that they are seeding the potential for change, the potential for healing, the potential for transformation throughout the planet as an energy field.
Mm-hmm.
It's very, at the time, it was very weird for me to perceive something like this and to even understand it. But that was a very clear image that came up, and that made me realize that I need to stop running around trying to create change with a lot of external actions, and I need to turn inward and first learn how to do that, how to heal from within, transform from within, create clarity from within so that it can shine out and ripple out.
Yeah. Yeah. Beautiful. Sounds like a kind of re-emergence of past life paths in a way to me, hearing it. But
maybe not.
Yeah.
Maybe yes. It's like all interwoven together also. Yeah.
And so
But possibly
there you were under the apricot tree in the Gaza Strip, and how did you make your way to, I think, Zen first and then beyond?
Well, really just one step after the other. And well, yeah, in the beginning I kept like getting very much involved in all my activism activity, let's say in my jobs, in my work as an NGO coordinator. So I eventually left Palestine and I left Gaza. I returned to France. I studied project management for solidarity projects. I worked in India, I worked in France, I worked in Southeast Asia. But on the side, there was something that really opened. There was like a very, very wide gate that had opened in my mind, if you will, and it was always very active. And as all of this external activity was happening, occurrences started happening in my life. Personally, like I would meet people and I would have dreams about them and know about their past history and their wounds and traumas and what to do for them to get better. And then they would get better, but I would get ill instead of them. So things like that happened.
So yeah, we're back after some technical difficulties.
Sorry about that.
It's amazing in the first place that we can do this across the world. So you were starting to tell some interesting stories about these dreams and perhaps premonitions you were getting about helping other people and the nature of their wounds and how to help. And you were starting to say that at the time it was when you engaged in healing others in this way, you found you were getting sick. And I imagine that led you to the next step in your path to try to solve that in some way.
So that was this time of my life where things were happening to me basically that I did not understand, but I knew they were happening and I could see that they were. And I was sort of like walking in the dark, manipulating energy and reading things in people, but with no orientation and no structure. And that wasn't very beneficial for me, if it was for other people at least. And so at that time, I really started to inquire and seek training and understanding. So I undertook my first Vipassana meditation retreat in Thailand. And that's how I was first introduced to insight meditation. Then sometimes later, I was intern in India in a community organization in a red light district. So I went and saw some teachers of Hinduism because I just had the sense that they might have something for me to learn there from such an ancient spiritual culture. And I met one of my first teacher who became a very good friend, who was a Hindu renunciate basically and trained me in yoga and in many different things from the Hindu tradition. And so little by little, I was just going step by step, basically, along my professional life, along my activism life. Soon after, I met Thich Nhat Hanh and the Plum Village community, so the Zen Vietnamese mindfulness community, which felt very good, which as a person with Vietnamese roots really felt like coming home and integrating many aspects of my life in one. Also because it is a community that very much was built on engaged Buddhism and on mindful activism in the world, if you will. So it sort of like brought all the aspects of my life together and gave them some coherence. And from there, it was like a slow but also sudden shift. It was like a moment after another, I would meet all these people and traditions that had such a great impact on me and with whom there was such a deep affinity. Soon after, I was invited to Vietnam by an elder Daoist, Buddhist monk of the community. So I started traveling in Vietnam and residing in Buddhist monasteries, in Buddhist hermitages for months-long periods of practice. And that's how my practice started to deepen. From first gleaning different methods here and there and exploring. Then it became living in community with long-term practitioners, but also living in like isolation, in seclusion, in very specific hermitages in the Vietnamese mountains. And yeah, little by little, it just became what I was doing. It just became like the most important part of my life, basically. It became my priority. It became how I was investing my time. It became my communities, my friends, my affiliations. So for some of this year, I always had a very good friend who was either this Hindu renunciate, either this Buddhist monk. And I would live from one hermitage to a monastery to an ashram. I practiced a lot of Vipassana as well in Thailand, in different traditions, which was very interesting and really built up my foundational meditative practice, if you will.
Yeah.
And that's how one thing after the other and one step after the other, I eventually met someone. That's a funny story, actually. So I can tell it because it's a cute story. I was in Thailand, and one day I was in the subway in Bangkok, and I walked by the table of a woman who was doing Thai astrology. And so I was curious. I was young and curious. It was the kind of thing that I could be interested in. So I just sat at her table and paid and waited to see what was Thai astrology and what was going to come out of that. Turns out it's very similar to Hindu astrology in terms of its layout. Anyhow, she produced predictions for me. And I don't remember it all, but I remember clearly that she gave me monthly predictions for the year ahead of me. So one prediction per month. And they were all very specific, and for some of them a little bit funny. Like there was one prediction that said, on that 1 month, you will get in trouble, you will get in conflict and in trouble because of one of your friends who is a woman who is fat. Just like that. Exactly, yeah. So it was funny to hear it, so I think I wrote it down and forgot about it, basically, because it wasn't that, yeah. But it turned out to be true, and it turned out that on that 1 month, I ended up in troubles and in conflict with a friend who was a woman who was fat. And even though I stayed on the lookout for a fat female friend, I came from a direction I did not see coming. So it was very funny. Yeah. And anyway, in her monthly predictions list, she told me on that other month, you will meet one man who is young and who will pass on to you a very important information for your life, for the development of your life and of your education. But this man speaks too much. Here's a prediction. And turns out that the prediction that months happened maybe a little bit less than a year later. And on that entire month, for the whole month, I was on a retreat in a Vipassana meditation center.
Okay, so you were describing meeting a man after the
prediction.
Yeah, in the line of predictions that this woman gave you. Yeah.
So yeah, the last prediction, like one of the prediction anyhow, was that I was on one of these months, I was going to meet one man who was young and who was going to give me an important information for my life and for future education, but that man spoke too much. And I remember actually this information because I rarely hang out with people who speak all the time. Because that gets me really tired quickly. It's really not my sensitivity. So I remember that. I was like, I doubt it because I don't hang out with people who speak. Anyway, it turned out that on that 1 month, I was in a Vipassana meditation center in a Buddhist temple in Thailand for the entire month. And I was literally locked down in my room for a first 21 days retreat. During which I was only meeting my meditation teacher once a day. Otherwise, I was alone in my room, locked in my room all day. And then I had 3 days of rest while still residing at the monastery. And then I was entering another cycle of 10 days retreat. And so it was very unlikely that I would meet anyone. But it turned out that on the 22nd day, so on the first day of my 3 days of rest, on the morning as I was getting out of my room to go grab my breakfast at the dining hall, as I was closing my door, I felt that somebody was watching me in my back, from my back. So I turned around, and indeed there was like a young Westerner that was looking at me quite intently. So I said, okay, so that's a lot of looking, but whatever. I went to the dining hall, I picked some food, went throughout my day, practiced in my room, rested. At lunchtime, went back to the dining hall, and there he sat next to me at the dining hall. And he came up to me and to start talking. And he actually was coming straight from China, from the Five Immortals Temple, where he had spent some months with the person who was going to become my teacher. And he sat next to me and he told me, oh, you remind me of that place I'm just coming from because you sort of look Chinese. And we started exchanging and talking, and we ended up talking for the 3 full days of rest that I had because we had so much to tell each other and so much in common, which was quite inappropriate for the place and time, but we still did. We still met and talked. And at the end of these 3 days, he just told me, I really feel that you have to go there. So I'm gonna put you in contact with that place so that next time there is an opening to receive foreign students, you can be on the list.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, okay, that sounds wonderful. And that's all. And I went back on my 10 days retreat, and I basically saw him again maybe 1 or 2 times after that, and never again.
Mm-hmm.
And nothing happened after that for maybe a year and a half. So I sort of forgot about it.
Did you recognize at the time that it fit the prediction pattern? Had you noticed that?
I don't remember.
Yeah.
Oh, I don't remember. Yeah, funny that I don't remember, but I don't. No, I very vividly remember our conversations because it felt very close. It was very engaging. It felt very lively, and everything was sharing with me about the Daoist temple in China gave me a lot of inspiration, which was actually surprising because I had not considered going to China before, and even less for spiritual practice and studies.
Mm-hmm.
Just because of what China had become throughout the 20th century. It's not the place where you imagine you will encounter still deep-rooted spiritual tradition so easily. Anyhow, I didn't see him again after these moments, and for a year and a half nothing happened. So I forgot about it. I thought it was not going to happen and whatever. And a year and a half later, I was in Vietnam for 3 months. I was living in Hermitage on a mountain, so I was literally out of touch.
Mm-hmm.
I was just not writing or calling anybody. And after those 3 months, I came down the mountain. I went to the city, to Saigon, to fly back to Bangkok. I was going to Thailand next. And on the day I arrived in Saigon, I go online after 3 months of no connection online. And I find like maybe 5 emails from this man spread throughout those 3 months that I was not answering emails, basically. And the first email was telling me, oh, I heard there is an opening for receiving new students at the Daoist temple I was telling you about in China. Are you still interested? Please let me know if you're interested. I'll put you in the list. Second email, I have no answer for you, but I think you have destiny with this place. I'm putting you on the list. Third email, you're on the list. You're expected to arrive on that day at that place with that amount of money for your donation, and you're going to be staying at the temple for 6 months, and you're going to be training in this and this and that. Fourth email, I still don't have any answer. You're still on the list. It's that. Call that person when you have that email, or write to that person to confirm you're coming. So I confirmed. I was like, okay, well, all of that happened. Now I have to be in China in like 3 months with that amount of money that obviously I don't have since I'm just coming down. Yeah, but I'm answering. Okay, I'll be there, and I'm getting in connection with my contact person, and then I fly back to Bangkok. I arrive in Bangkok. It's a very, very funny like line of events. That's why I like to tell those stories. And as soon as I arrived in Bangkok on the bus from the airport, it was a time where there was no smartphones, the good old times where people were still smart and focused. So I had just like this little phone, and I open it. I put my Thai SIM card in it. I discard the Vietnamese card. I put my Thai SIM card, and I turn on my phone. And I've just arrived in Bangkok for 2 hours when my phone rings. So I pick up, and a Thai woman, an unknown Thai woman, starts talking to me, telling me, oh, you are Miss LoAn Guylaine Tran. I've heard about you. We are shooting this movie with the Princess of Thailand, and we need a character that looks exactly like you to impersonate that character, and the job is like this, and you'll have that many action scenes to shoot at night, and this is money you will get, and can you come and meet me tomorrow at the studio? And Until today, I don't know how this woman got my phone number. But I said, okay, of course, sure, I will. So, and I'm like, okay, well, I have that address and that phone. I go on the street, I buy a cheap dress, and I get ready to go to studios the next day. I go to the studios the next day. Same story. She shows me the entire storyboard, the characters, who I have to impersonate. Like it's a very strange job interview, basically. And then she asks me, so of course you have a lot of experience in shooting for cinema, is that right? And here, so see, when I was a teenager, I went to a theater school in Paris. I was going to like a theater club and like acting club. So I just answers, oh yes, I did acting school in Paris, which is true. And she's in Bangkok, she's Thai, and she's like, oh wow, acting school in Paris. And she gives me the job. So here I have this job, and in like 15 days, I make all the money I need to fly to China, get visa, and offer my donations. And
Amazing.
yeah, amazing. That's how I arrived at the temple the first time.
Yeah.
So all this funny sequence of events.
Yeah, not just funny. That's an extreme level of synchronicity. Yeah.
Like coming out from what was a dark for me, like from the unknown, things were just thrown at me like this, and then had to be lined up until that.
Yeah. Interesting. And so meanwhile, internally, presumably with all this practice, I imagine seated practice, you've been probably making steady, if not fast, progress as well. So these things, your narrative and your internal experience coming together into a rather sharp point at Five Immortals. Does that fit your experience?
I don't know. For me, arriving first at Five Immortals was a little bit of a shock. Because I was really coming from meditation practice. So I was very used to be sitting for 10, 12 hours a day for a lot of internal meditation practice in environments that were codified very specifically. Buddhist culture throughout Southeast Asia and Asia has its own culture and its own codes. And there's a lot of manners to it. And when I arrived at Five Immortals, nothing was like that. Nothing. First, I was put to train Gong Fu for 8 hours a day before I could even sit. So by the time I could finally sit at the end of the day, I was so tired and my body was so painful that sitting was nothing like what I had done before. I was pretty much yelled at all day long. There was nothing like the fine, soft manners, clear manners of Buddhism that I knew.
Yeah.
So in the beginning it was a little bit of a shock, to be honest, and I was confused. It made me quite confused because I wasn't sure why I had to go through some trainings that I was put through. And that's very much how it works too. It's like you put through the training first and then you figure it out as you go. That's what training is really.
Sure.
It wasn't like such a smooth journey, or no, it was like stepping into a whole new world. Of course, there were many aspects that were also very inspiring, where I had a lot of immediate affinity, like the temple space, for example. When you enter in the temple space, you immediately know you belong to that space and enter in resonance, vibrational affinity with it. Or with the altars, with sitting in meditation at the altars, with all the energy field that was cultivated there. All of that, yes, definitely made a lot of sense and was very direct and immediate as an encounter. But the training itself, like the education itself and the way it was unfolding and happening, a lot of it was very different from where I was coming from. Very, very.
Well, to kind of endure that confusing and uncomfortable time, you must have had some kind of underlying confidence or clarity in this being right for you. Or had you just kind of made the commitment and you were going to see it through?
That's a good question. And it's an important question that I ponder often when I discuss people and their practice, because faith or trust in the practice is such an important element, right?
Yeah.
When we seek, we're basically seeking something we don't know or we don't have.
Right.
So how can we know we found it since we don't know?
Yeah.
So faith and trust is such an important element. I think there was a mix of both. I think on the one hand, I was able to recognize that there was something very genuine, traditional and true in the place I was at, in my teacher, in what he had achieved, but also in what he was teaching and where that was coming from. So the history of the lineage and the accuracy of the methods. Like all of it was clearly delivered very appropriately. And I could recognize that.
Yeah.
And then of course there was like the whole element of confusion. First, it's hard. It's a hard training. It's not soft.
Yeah.
But nothing I had done before in my life was soft either, you know. It's nothing. So it was just in the continuity of course, when you start something at first, if there is this element of difficulties that may be normal. And and then you see as you go. Like I remember my first training session was 6 months, and there were many phases throughout this first 6 months of first conclusion, and then moving through first stage, reaching some clarity and understanding, and then another one. But then you leave and you return to where you came from, basically, or your more regular life, and then you can digest and you can observe everything that you've built in yourself, and how it has changed you and prepared you. And then your trust and your faith gains momentum, if you will.
Yeah. And so, as you trained in this way, what was your orientation? Was it kind of exploration, or this I can see is kind of my path to realization, or this is path to understanding and being better able to be a healer, or a combination of all those things?
A combination of all of these, definitely. Definitely a combination of all of these. It was like, exploring themes that were very much alive on my life path since many years, but through a different lens, with a different vocabulary, with different principles also, and different ways to go about them. And a lot of those ways made a lot of sense and were very helpful. So it was a lot of these. Yeah, a lot of these. For me, what definitely was a striking feature in the Daoist teachings as I was taught at that time, was how grounding and structuring it was for me. Because as a person, I definitely was someone who was very open intuitively, so open to heaven, you could say, with a very deep affinity towards that openness, but with many more challenges to live grounded in the earth, to live grounded in this body, to live grounded in the earth, in reality, and be able to just be a human beings in between, you know?
Yeah.
And so that really was a striking feature of Daoism for me, is that it made me build that foundation of grounding that made me able to have a healthy body first and then to handle life down here while keeping my heavenly connections, if you will, and not just seek or yearn for living in the heavenly connections away from the earthly plane, which is not what the human life is for.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
And so that was a contrast with the previous traditions you'd been involved in, and one that kind of resonated and struck you as true and right for you.
Well, it resonated. It more than resonated. Like at first, for the first few years, I wasn't even exclusive to Daoism in my practice. But then throughout my personal life and events that happen in my personal life, professionally, in my family, you go through the basic challenges of life, sickness, death, and so forth.
Yeah.
And reality just sort of like imposed it, like made it clear for me that I needed to take care of that balance, of my own balance, and that Taoism and the training was doing that for me.
Yeah.
In ways that the other traditions were not doing as much or as efficiently.
So you arrived for a 6-month course and stayed for a decade, right?
No,
Or,
it didn't happen like this. It wasn't that linear. It wasn't that linear at all.
okay, yeah.
I went through a 6-month course. I did a 6-month course, and then I left.
Okay.
And then I returned some months later, like half a year later or something, and I stayed for another 3-4 months.
I see.
Yeah. Yes, and then I left, and I didn't return for a couple years actually.
Okay, yeah.
I was working in India. I was very involved in an organization there with the job there, and so forth. And then I returned, and then I didn't leave. And then I returned expecting I would be there for 4 or 5 months.
Mm-hmm.
And I ended up staying onward for 5 years or so.
Yeah. So somewhere in there, you must have started to learn Chinese and started to be able to communicate with your teacher directly. There must have been a translator there at first.
Yes,
Yeah.
there were.
Yeah.
Which was very helpful because learning Chinese is quite daunting at first. So yes, from the very beginning, from my first trip there, my first 6 months there, I self-studied Chinese, but it didn't seem to give any results for the first 6 months, which is quite discouraging, And then when I returned the following times and I stayed 3-4 months again, I kept studying, and then a few things started to make sense. And what was very helpful definitely was that the entire times I was there studying, there always were previous senior students of my teacher who were translating him. So you were always exposed to the teaching being taught by his mouth in Chinese. And then immediately after, someone translated in English. And depending on the skill of the translator, as the translation was more or less very accurate. But sometimes it was very, very accurate because we've had very skillful senior students. And so just by listening a lot to the teachings, at first it's too much information. There's the teaching itself, it's just too much information.
Yeah.
Once you become familiar with the Daoist teaching, with the Daoist principle, with its vocabulary, with its building blocks, etc., and once you hear it multiple times in both languages, and if you keep self-studying Chinese on the side, of course, then your ear, your brain, you get used to it. Or at least that's how it happened for me. And for me, there really was a moment that I went through a threshold.
Mm-hmm.
And before that threshold, I would speak, people would not understand me, people would speak, I would not understand them.
Mm-hmm.
After the threshold, they started understanding me, and I started understanding them. And from that moment onward, it's really quick. It was really quick to progress just because of the way Chinese language is set up. The grammar is so simple.
Mm-hmm.
That aren't many declination verbs, past tense, future tense, whatever. The grammar is so simple. So you just need to add on words, a little bit of structure, but a lot of vocabulary. So I would just listen and pick up words and register them and record them and then review them and relearn them. Dozens and dozens of words day by day by day by day. And that's how it built up.
Mm-hmm.
That's how I did that. Until one day I was just able to understand directly from the mouth of my teacher what he was saying. And if I was missing a few words, I could just look them up as he was talking.
Yeah.
And from there on it was sort of done. So that's what built my Chinese. I can really say that my Chinese is from my teacher's mouth because I understand all of his language. But if you take me outside of that context, it might be very, very different. Maybe I won't understand. Yeah.
Yeah. So I imagine as your training started to include all of these many aspects of Taoism and the tradition, that some of that is gathering information, and the translation and interpretation, there isn't too much, you can't get too far from the intent. But once you get into deeper, more advanced meditation and alchemy, the translation and interpretation become, I think, much more challenging. And you would have to really trust not only in the Chinese skills of your translator, if that's still the mode in which you're receiving the teachings, but also in their internal development so that they can understand and transmit that. Did you run into that obstacle, or by the time you got to the more advanced alchemical trainings, you already could understand directly?
Yes and no, I would say. Yes and no. It really was a process, of in spiral.
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to remember.
Yeah.
It all was. Yeah, I'm trying to remember how it all was. I think there has been a little bit of everything. Like I remember moments in the first years when I wasn't speaking Chinese enough yet. When I had questions and there were exchanges with Shufo that in which, it did feel that something was getting lost in translation. But it's also hard to say if I had enough understanding of those principles and those practice at that point.
Sure.
For sure, always to be able to communicate directly. That's always the best. However, if you have a good translator, that person would translate only what the teacher says.
Yeah.
And not add or subtract anything, but just take the words and translate them. Right. So there should not be any loss of content or any distortion of content. If there's loss of content or distortion of content, I would not consider that a proper translation, to be honest. And that would be problematic, actually, for the direct transmission of the teaching. So.
And as you mentioned before, you're also hearing him say the Chinese, which of course, is transmitting more than just the meaning of the words. There's you're receiving his intention, even if there wasn't a translation, in a sense, in my experience.
Yes, there's both. Yes, definitely the presence and the direct heart-to-heart transmission matters much and can do a lot. And then if there is conversation and discussion and question and answer, just have a good translator, basically.
Yeah. Yeah. So all these different categories of medicine, whether it's through sound or through herbs or through acupuncture, and then the martial training and the ritual training, was all of this happening concurrently, or you would have a course in something and then practice and ask questions and be around to continue that training, and then something else?
A little bit all of that, actually. So we have to look at the context in which it all happened, which really is the context of the development of the activity within the Five Immortals Temple and its history. The Five Immortals Temple is this small temple in the WuDang Mountain range. So it's apart, away from the main WuDang complex of temples that receives a lot of visitors. It's a local temple on top of a local mountain, a little bit away. And so when Li Shufo, my teacher, first started living there, he became a disciple of the abbess that was still running it and who had lived there throughout the Cultural Revolution. And the temple itself was very dilapidated. It was pretty much falling apart at the end of the 20th century. So he undertook to rebuild it as he was staying with its abbess, who was his teacher and who was an older female renunciate. So he first rebuilt it by himself, by hand, collecting clay and baking bricks and just building up walls and things like that. And then, after the years 2000, between 2000 and 2010, basically, the first foreign seekers starting to arrive in WuDang. So people often who were in martial art and who were after WuDang Gong Fu and things like this, who wanted to teach martial art from the WuDang teachers. And so he took a first student, then he took a second, then he took a third. It was isolated events where he would teach a few things to people here and there. And then he saw that this was all happening and he had this idea to gather little groups, to set up little groups of students and teach them, and in exchange collect their donation and use that money to rebuild the temple. And so that's how it all started. So in the beginning, he was just making up these small groups. And my first session, my first 6-month session, we would do some of everything. We started with Gong Fu training, all the basics, and then some Qigong conditionings, Gong Fu conditionings, and then weapon, sword, bagua, but very progressively throughout the course of 6 months with a very solid 2 to 3 months basics training, so very physical intensive. And then little by little, parallelly to that, she would start to introduce the other disciplines. So medicine principles and practices, rituals, scriptures, and of course, meditation, feng shui, I Ching, and so forth. So it was all really, and it was so rich because it was this whole, it was this curriculum that was, everything was woven together and everything was reflecting on each other on the foundation of the Daoist principles.
Yeah.
That's how it started, really. And then throughout the following years, he started to receive more students. There was more and more interest. from international students to study and explore. And so he started to structure more the way he was teaching. And I think something that I was very lucky was that I was at the temple during the year that a lot of this shaping and structuring happened. So from a very large amount of material that was all interwoven together, we defined topics: medicine, gong fu, hygiene, feng shui, I Ching, scriptures and rituals, meditation, and basically build them up in like singular curriculum and singular courses, just to make them more efficiently accessible to people, because it was very difficult basically to organize internships that were 6 months long because of visa issues, because of people's abilities or availabilities and so forth. And so it was a process of structuring all of this in different topics. And so throughout those years, I witnessed and I partook into that process, from being just a student to then doing a lot of like administrative tasks, to becoming a translator and assistant, and to finally teaching parts of the curriculum alongside my teacher in the temple. So it was very interesting to observe that, and that really shaped me as a teacher as well. And give me, it is a very interesting experience actually, to observe how to transmit principles, practices, methods in ways that are coherent and comprehensive and efficient. Yeah.
And so when you teach, do you try to impart the interwoven principles and practices and weave your way through all of these possibilities at once, or have you found it more effective to isolate and then integrate at a later date?
So it's more like every discipline is an entrance door and a path in itself. And different people have different affinities with specific doors and paths. So some people are going to cultivate through medicine primarily. Some people are going to cultivate through martial art primarily. Some people are going to cultivate through scriptures and ritual primarily. And some people are going to combine some of those doors and paths and balance and integrate many aspects. So it depends on the person and their sensitivities and their minds and what they have more affinity with, I would say.
Yeah.
So in the way I teach today, today I teach mostly short courses, 10 days, 1 week, it's very short. So yes, generally I isolate a specific main door or main path, maybe Tai Chi Chuan, maybe scripture, maybe medicine. Sometimes I combine two, but a little bit less frequently. And then from that door and that path, I always draw the teaching from the principles, from the Daoist principles, and from the foundational methods. So there is no way you can learn any of this discipline if you don't have a meditation practice and if you don't have an energy movement practice. So they are embedded everywhere. So that's more how I design the shape of the courses I offer right now. And it turns out that people often follow multiple paths. But I think what's most important is to really transmit the principles of Taoist cultivation so that people don't get lost in the amount of information, knowledge, and disciplines that there are. Like something I often witness, for example, is there is like this whole part of the community that has a lot of affinity with calculations. So we all calculations techniques, I Ching, Bazi, Feng Shui, Qimendujia, da 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 da.
Yeah.
And every one of these disciplines is a world in itself, and it's mystical. It's intellectually very interesting and nourishing if your mind has affinity with this type of spaces, and I understand that because I do. But it's very important to understand the place within Daoist cultivation principles of these arts.
Yeah.
Because you can become a feng shui master, you can become a bazi master, you can become a whatever calculation method master, but not cultivate anymore.
Right. Yeah.
And so that's where being able to bring back the different disciplines and paths and door to the root of Daoist cultivation principles, and what is it that you want to be doing with these disciplines is the most important, actually. So for me, it's the question is, from where are you teaching the disciplines, the methods, and to do what?
Yeah. So both a kind of mystical, metaphysical core, staying tethered to that core, and it sounds like also maybe a ethical lens through which one approaches both the learning and the practice and the mastery and kind of sharing of that with the larger world.
Yes.
Yeah.
Of course, yes, because the point is Taoist cultivation.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Taoist cultivation is refinement of the self. It is simplicity, humility, frugality, silence of the mind, and opening the inner gate. So it cannot be about accumulating concept, accumulating techniques, accumulating power, accumulating fame or wealth or whatnot. And this has to be very clear anytime, otherwise we're not teaching Taoism anymore.
Right.
We're teaching side branches that are sad paths that lead somewhere else.
Yeah.
Which is the most important question in the end is, or at least for me it is, where are we going? What are we doing? What are we investing our energy, mind, heart, time, resources to go where and to do what? And how does that make sense?
Yeah.
For us, for our life, for the world.
So at this point in your practice and your teaching life, how do you relate to that aspect of yourself that kind of brought you in this direction, that is to say, activism and engagement?
How I relate to this aspect of myself? Well, I feel that it is very much integrated in my activity as a teacher, because my point was always to extract meaning, to give meaning, and also to contribute something that has a positive impact in ways that I believe in.
Yeah.
On other people's lives, on the lives of the 10,000 beings, and on society at large. So I feel that this is fulfilled through my activity as a teacher at a very small scale, of course. I'm not going to change the face of the world. But I know it does. I know it does from the relationship I have with people who come and study with me, why they come, why they stay, how they grow, how we grow together. I know this is fulfilled when I witness that.
Yeah.
Yes. Every so often, I look back at this decade of my life, and I always appreciate how direct was a contact with people who were really in need. So I don't forget that also.
Yeah.
And I'll probably get back to that at some point in different forms, or I'll try to include it somewhere.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if that answers the question fully, but sometimes I wish I was able to do more than what I do already, but my time is limited as a person. So sometimes I wish I could, for example, have these big schools that would allow people to study and practice and grow, and at the same time their contribution could support the growth and practice of other people, or But
Yeah.
so that's sort of like the vision, but right now it's existing in something small as a
Sure.
scale of the world. But it feels satisfying. I know that in myself, I feel coherent with myself,
Yeah.
which matters very much to me. Otherwise, I wouldn't be able to go on. I would have to change paths. But no, it feels coherent.
Yeah. Of all of these gates, doors that you have learned and teach, do you have a primary door that fits most naturally for you, whether it's healing or liturgy or music?
I think I have more than one. For sure, primarily first meditation and inner contemplation. And then, yes, music, liturgy, and the study of scriptures. I love getting into my bubble and entering my flow, hunched over a text and just getting inspired by it. Ceremony, of course, so communication, like ritual, liturgy, communication with the formless. Yeah, I don't know. For me, they all flow into each other.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't just, isolate one. Because the liturgy of ceremony and communication with the formless flows into healing and
Yeah.
all of it. Yeah, it's so no. I actually love the variety of the Daoist arts.
Yeah. Well, I think once a person makes, progress along these paths, then you're always in a way just doing one thing. It's just coming into form in this way or that way.
Yeah.
Huh. Do you teach meditation in the language of alchemy? Do you find the language and kind of framework of alchemy supportive for both your own understanding and the understanding of your students?
Not so much, actually. Not so much. No, generally I keep it simple.
Mm-hmm.
So that my purpose, my goal is first that people are able to properly establish a foundation of practice, a foundation of clarity and stillness, and a foundation of accumulating energy field.
Yeah.
And so, no, I don't go into a lot of details and information in the alchemical language, so as to not distract people, I guess. Yeah, that's how I would say that.
Yeah.
Because the way I was taught, alchemical practices require a very solid foundation in clarity and stillness, and in accumulation of the energy fields through the stability of Jing. And from what I observe in students in society, basically, is that already establishing that foundation is not easy.
Yeah.
So in the way I was taught, alchemy, there really isn't a lot of point into talking people with a lot of language to what could eventually happen next,
Yeah.
as they are first establishing that foundation. Well, in some courses we do. In some courses we do. In some courses we do. But we first very clearly make sure everyone understands the basic principles and how to build the foundation. And from there, eventually, we will develop theoretically on the principles of alchemy and how it's on its methods. But while leading meditation, I wouldn't do that.
Yeah.
Unless people individually come very, very specific questions that shows that they need it.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
That's really how I was taught, really. That's really how I was taught. I was taught with like a learning of the framework of alchemy and how it works, and what are the methods and stages and steps. But in its application with people directly as a teacher or as an assistant, it was always build the foundation first in ways that are simple, clear, and clear.
Mm-hmm.
And ever a person comes with manifestations, appearances, or questions that clearly demonstrate that it's relevant to introduce more elements or steps. And yes, otherwise otherwise there's no point.
And so, in your experience as both a student and a teacher, is your relationship to alchemy that it is a description of a process that naturally happens with the right orientation and the foundation, or is it one of specific application of will, specific doing at specific moments?
In the way I understand alchemy from what I was told, I would say there are both.
Yeah.
There are moments of natural unfoldings and moments where you need to where you need to direct things in specific ways, if you will,
Mm-hmm.
or watch over them in specific ways and not just let them naturally happen.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say there are stages, and both alternate or are going to be happening at different times.
Yeah. And
so neither fully one, neither fully the other.
Sure. And how does, excuse me, how does that practice and process relate to your understanding from other traditions like the Insight tradition?
Yeah, interesting question. I've thought about it quite a bit. How does it relate? I think there is a lot of overlap, and that there also are differences, specifically differences in methods and sometimes in objectives, and so in results. The spaces of overlaps and where I find that Buddhist meditation or insight meditation is very helpful to establish a meditation practice is on the establishment of concentration, deep, stable concentration. Of course, the establishment of the ability to let go through the observation of impermanence. And all of this happen together, sort of. And in my experience, and in the accumulation of merit and the cleansing of karma. So clearly these elements are very prominent in Buddhist meditation, and they definitely are foundational building blocks of Daoist alchemy. And so there's a very great overlap there. Yes. Because if there's like a refinement of karma and accumulation of merit solid enough, if there is establishment of deep, stable concentration and within letting go through the observation of impermanence, what naturally needs to fall into place to get the alchemical process started naturally falls into place. It's a result of these elements, I would say. And then that's a point where what you do with it can maybe make a difference. If that makes sense.
Yeah. In the insight tradition, somehow in my own experience, it's only been recently that I've been reading with any real depth in that direction, and the stages of insight are so specific and detailed, and in some tellings or teachings there are these extremely specific orientations and what to do with this and what to do with that, and it was kind of surprising to me to encounter. My process has been more like what you describe, one of kind of foundation and orientation that then simply proceeds, and the kind of signs along the way fit with Taoist literature in this way or that, but are not so organized and such a clear progression as what I'm finding in this literature. So hopefully your camera will come back on here in a sec. But I'm wondering about, in this context, about your orientation to this kind of staging and progressing. Now you've dropped out entirely, so hopefully see you in a moment. So I was asking you some more details about meditation stages and your experience and as a student and teacher, but in the face of continued technical difficulties and it getting so late for you, maybe we can just move to wrap up and let people know where they can find you and what. I know I'm pretty sure you just started a course teaching the singing of the liturgy and also the meaning, I think. And perhaps that can't be joined anymore, but you have other courses coming up as well?
Well, yeah, it's a big moment right now for us, and we've had like a lot ongoing. And the main thing, yes, is that I just opened for the first time actually a course on the morning liturgy, on the morning scriptures that includes textual study, but most importantly, chanting and the chanting methods. And yeah, we just started. I guess we could take people if they still take people if they contact us right after watching this video, and if they are very, very motivated, because it is a course that requires a deep commitment, something strong from within that makes you feel called to learn this specific practice. Otherwise, we keep running courses as well, online and on retreats. I guess the big news for me also is that this year I'll bring my first group of students in retreat at the temple in China, my French-speaking students actually.
Yeah.
But that feels good. That really feels like coming full circle to somewhat return now with my family and all of my students, and to be able to prepare them ahead of time, to support them after the retreat at the temple through their training, their ordination, and all of that. So that's that. Yes, that's very uplifting and beautiful, and we have a lot to do basically. And otherwise, our regular activity continues. We teach online, we teach on retreats on site. Next year, probably in France, in Italy, in Switzerland, and in French Canada. And we just live life, practice, grow, all of that. And yes, I think the meditation conversation is very interesting. There is a lot to say about it. There is a lot to question too. What people experience, what people get as a result, how people grow, what are the differences. I recently was having such a conversation with another friend who is a Daoist practitioner. What is the difference between Dantian meditation and between Buddhist insight meditation? Are there overlaps? Where are the overlaps? Do they appear for everyone, and so forth? Some of these are very interesting questions, certainly.
Yeah, well, maybe we can talk in more detail about those things another time. I've had a lot of fun in this conversation. Appreciate you coming on. And
Pleasure. Thank you for your invitation, Ian.
yeah. Okay. Thank you.